Good afternoon. Welcome back to Cool Your Heels with Lillian Caldwell on AM/FM 24/7. And this afternoon, our special guest is Brenda Walton, who is a women's empowerment coach, an international bestseller, and the creator of the WORTHY program. So good afternoon, Brenda. How are you doing this lovely rainy day?
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you very much for coming. Now, I don't know what WORTHY means besides meaning worthy, so I'm going to have you explain it.
Sure. The Worthy program, the acronym WORTHY, stands for 6 steps in a process that I take. Typically women, although I have worked with men, but typically women through a 6-step process that helps them move into becoming fearless, unstoppable, and wildly successful. So each step has a number of activities and moves them through moving from being stuck, not feeling worthy, not feeling enough, not feeling like they can take on that new job or that new relationship or whatever it might be, and moving into a place of standing in their own worth.
So where were you when I needed all this?
I was probably doing my own journey. It was my own journey that led to the development of the program. So
I see. Well, I started with my own internet talk radio station 12 years ago. Was that in place by then, or were you still searching in dark corners?
I went through, you're familiar with Jack Canfield, the Chicken Soup for the Soul guy?
Yes.
So I went through a training program with him in 2009 and 2010, and that started my own journey of self-discovery and led to my development of the Worthy program. So probably not about the time you were going through it, but shortly after.
I see. Okay, well, then I have some things to add to your program.
Perfect.
Okay, so Brenda, as a women's empowerment coach, so people understand exactly, so they can try to identify what do you do? Are there simple steps that you can take people through?
Well, each step, so for example, the W in Worthy stands for wake up. And so there are a number of activities that I have people go through in that step, but it's really all about looking at what is and what isn't working in your life and what you want to do about it, and being brave and courageous and really facing with brutal honesty mostly the things that aren't working, and making some decisions about what you want to do about that. It might be someone who's struggling with what's my life purpose. It might be someone who's struggling financially. It might be someone who's struggling in relationships and unresolved, not even intimate relationships, but often I get women who are struggling with, say, family relationships and being estranged. And so it's all about working through all of that and figuring out what is working, what isn't working, and what do you want to do about it. Because what I have found is if people could get themselves out of those unhealthy things in their lives that are no longer serving them, they would. That's why they're drawn to programs like mine, because I provide the support to help them really face that in a different way than they have in the past.
So in actuality, I just usually stand in front of the mirror, much cheaper. But a lot of people don't have that type of courage, because when you look in the mirror, what you see is what you get. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of people don't have the kind of necessary courage to do that. So what you do is you pretty much, clasp their hands, shake them up a little bit, and says, okay.
Well, and it's true. I think that there are a lot of people like you and I who've had some self-development work and self-development journeys. And it's easier to face that by looking in the mirror when something comes up, it triggers us or needs to be dealt with. We can simply look within and work through that problem because we have the tools that have helped us in the past to get us through it. But for those women who haven't really had that experience, haven't looked at it, it is about really, pushing them a little bit beyond their story. So often they'll have this story about how they got to the place where they're at, and they've told it so many times, and they've been a part of that story so much in their life that they don't often even see that they're not standing in their own worth, that they are in a victim role, or they don't see the lesson or the blessing in that, so that they can move forward and live a more fuller, authentic, meaningful life, because they're so stuck in the cycle. This is the way it's always been, and they don't know how to get themselves out of it. And so, but once they've been through that step, like people like you or I have, it's easier. They pop those things that trigger us pop up and become in our awareness, and we deal with them so much quicker. And that's the beautiful thing about watching women who go through this worthy process, is when they get to the why, which is the final step in the process, the say yes to life, they are in flow. They're taking steps. They're moving forward in the direction that they want to. And when things do continue to pop up, because it's never completely stops, we're always uncovering new things that we need to deal with. But when they're in that place of yes to life, they see those triggers and events, and they dive in, and they're quicker to deal with it because they've had success with dealing with things that don't work for them in the past.
Now, it says that you're an international bestseller. Have you written any books about what you do?
I am a co-author in 2 books, and I basically wrote a chapter that talks about the Worthy program and my steps in my own story of how I worked through that Worthy process. So the first book I was in is called Success University for Women in Business. And the second book, which just launched, that first book launched about a year ago, and the second book is Women Who Influence, which launched just this past March.
All right. So this book, that Women Who Influence, what is its primary message?
There are 30 women in the book who have all authored a chapter in the book, and they all sort of tell their own inspirational stories, some really powerful and moving stories from women around the world. So across North America, we became international bestseller because we had women in Canada and U.S., of course. But what I find fascinating about the book is that any woman who reads it, in the various stories that are told, will most likely see themselves in at least one or two or even more of the stories. And so they can see by that woman's specific journey and their story how that woman moved herself through and became stronger, more powerful, and a woman of influence. And so it's intended to be a series of stories that inspire other women to become their own best selves.
And that's an unusual thing to do these days. Do you find that women have a tendency to lag behind men?
Well, I think it's from childhood. I think we, and that's why I focus on self-confidence and self-worth, is I think it's rare to find a woman who's completely confident in herself and her choices. And that's because we've been taught in so many spoken and unspoken ways from the time we were little girls. Family members, teachers, friends, even members of the community have unintentionally, sometimes intentionally, but mostly unintentionally, taught us that we somehow don't measure up, that one thing that I remember being told a lot was, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And as I became a woman and had my first job and started to be in meetings where I was expected to speak up, there were points in those meetings where I would pause and reflect about, is this a nice thing to say? Instead of, in some cases, saying what needed to be said and letting people receive it the way that they they receive it because it needed to be said. And so we have been, I believe, taught from a very early age as females to not really step into our greatness the way that our male counterparts are taught.
Oh, I agree with you on that. And I was talking to the person before you when I was Miss Potter when I was interviewing her, and she pretty much said the same thing. I know I was brought up during the 50s and 60s, and I know we were brought up to be barefoot and pregnant.
Yes.
And that was our role, and to support our husband and whatever he was to do in his life. And even though we were sent to college, whether it was an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, it wasn't so much that they expected us to go out with a career with it. It was a fallback in case something happened to the guy.
And you did very well, yes.
The audience has to understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had a lot of people say, well, I can point to a lot of ladies who were born during the 50s and brought up during the 60s, and they don't say what you're saying. And I said, but you have to understand what ethnic background did they come from? Because we're the kids that were born right after World War II. And even though the war opened opportunities for ladies that were not available before them, I remember girls coming out of Irish and Italian families where they were expected to get married as soon as they graduated. And if they were not pinned by their prom, they were resigned or delegated the role of being a spinster.
Yes.
And when you try to explain that today, they look at you like you just came over with the dinosaurs.
And what I think is really interesting about this time in that we're in right now is that each generation before us has sort of paved the pathway. So the women who were born in the 50s and 60s sort of absolutely dealt with that. My mother and my aunts were all sort of in that period, and so she wanted a better life for me, and so that created a better life for me. I look at my stepdaughter and my granddaughter, and I think I don't want them to sort of face those same challenges that I'm facing right now. So that's why I care so deeply about this whole Worthy program is each of us have women, girls, that are following in our footsteps, and I can't be a role model for them if I'm not living at my best self. So if I'm stuck in a place of not feeling worthy, if I'm stuck with old beliefs from the past that hold me back and keep me stuck, I can't be my best self and a role model for those women who are following in my footsteps. And that's what I think is so exciting about this time, because it feels to me like a major empowerment shift that's happening.
Well, they also need to be reminded, because a lot of them tend to take the past as the past, and they don't. It's the old standard, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't use it, you lose it. And whether or not you appreciate it, agree with it, or laugh behind your hand, it's still true.
That's right.
And you have to take advantage of the opportunities that people, the women before you, have carved out for you. Because if you don't, the path gets weedy, and then the infrastructure starts collapsing. I mean, take a look at our infrastructure now.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about roads and pipes, ladies. I'm talking about the fact that there are people who honestly believe that we should go back to the way it was in the 19th century with women.
Yeah, and I am grateful for the women before me who have paved the path for me to get here. And I look, often I'm in training sessions with women who are younger than me who are getting these messages much sooner. And I remember thinking, I wish I had been this aware in my 20s or 30s. And then when I took some time to reflect on it, I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned in the struggle. And the struggle isn't always fun, but I learn really powerfully the things that I no longer will settle for. So the women who have paved the path for me to get where I am today, I don't want to go back to a subservient kind of role. And so I know from those lessons, I know from my own lessons what kind of future I want for my stepdaughter and my granddaughter.
Yeah, and you have to be very conscientious of what you do because it reflects forward, not backwards. And you have to make sure that I have 2 granddaughters, and they're 11 turning 12. And we all know, ladies, that's the time when girls start dumbing themselves down because that was acceptable for the last 20 or 30 years. To be able to be popular with their friends and to be attractive to guys, the girls dumb themselves down. I remember my son coming home from school, and he's in his 40s with his own family. And he says, Mom, all the girls have dumbed themselves down. What gives? And I said, that's what society expects of them. And he says, well, they shouldn't listen to society. They should listen to themselves. I mean, he was really upset. And it's still going on.
There's a report, a national report on the state of self-esteem, and it's Real Girls, Real Pressure. And I love I found the statistic in there that said 7 in 10 girls at that age, the age you're just talking about, 7 in 10 girls believe that they're not good enough or do not measure up in some way, including their looks, performance in school, relationships, and with family and friends. It's at that age where our granddaughters are that's so critical right now that they don't bend to that pressure and become less than, because that's the time when it happens. That's when it happened to me. I remember being a pretty precocious little girl. My uncle has this favorite story that he used to tell about me, and I was staying there with them for the weekend, and he was out in the morning doing chores, and of course I'm curious, and I went with him, and he had taken these 2 5-gallon pails of grain out to feed some of the animals. He set one at the gate and took one into the pen and was putting it in their trough for them, and I couldn't see what he was doing, so I stepped up on the pail of grain and was kind of peering through the rails in the fence, and he said he turned around and he saw me standing in his grain, and he hollered at me, "You get your muddy boots out of my grain." And he said, I looked at him at 4 years old with my hands on my hips, and I said, "You're not the boss of me." And so I was fearless as a little girl, but it was when I got into school and I wanted to fit in and I wanted to be liked and I wanted to be with the fun people, and it's when I lost that piece of myself. That's the very first time that I remember it happening. Was I had a girl in my class who told the rest of the class that if they wanted to be friends with her, they couldn't be friends with me. And I spent 2 days crying because nobody would even talk to me. And so it's at that age that's so critical for girls.
Absolutely. And I see it with my own granddaughters. And even though they're their own person and they're bright and they're in sports and everything else, it's not enough.
Yeah.
So what you have to decide, and I have to tell you this, my little grandson at 5, he's not going to have that trouble. And I think that it's because society treats males and females differently in that respect.
It's interesting, though, because I've been at different networking events where I've talked about my program, and often women will ask me about the program, and inevitably there's a man standing within the vicinity, within earshot, and listening in. And I remember one event that I was at, and I was talking to this woman, and this man, you could see him kind of tearing up a little bit, and he leaned in and he said, "Why is that program only for women?" And he said that men, in their own and unique way, deal with self-worth issues, but it's harder for them to sort of be honest about it, because they're taught to be tough and fearless, and nothing ever breaks them, right? And whereas women, we talk, we work things out by talking. And so it's been interesting to me on this journey how many men have actually stepped up and said, why is it just a program for women?
And I think that they should get a program. When my son was growing up, and I was a single parent, I raised him from a woman's point of view. And his wife hasn't stopped thanking me since.
Yeah.
Because I made him sensitive.
Yep.
I said, when a girl comes in between the ages of 10 and 12 and she's bitchy, it's because she's had her change her life. And she's embarrassed if she's the first one in her class.
Yes.
And you feel icky. Because he knew how babies were born. He's an artist, so he started life drawing at a very young age. So he understood that. And I said, so when she comes in and snaps at you, it's really nothing personal. But you have to understand that she's being drained of this extra stuff that would usually cushion the egg.
Yes.
And he looked at me and I said, you know when you have a bad stomachache? Yeah. And you know how bitchy you become? Yeah. And he already has a smile on his face. He says, well, imagine having that from 3 to 7 days. And he said, I said, exactly. So keep that in mind. And he did. And the girls just thought he was, they loved him. But I made a point of raising him that way because I wanted him to be aware, because most boys are not.
That's right.
And I didn't want him to be caught in that trap.
Mm-hmm.
It was important to me. But I know he got a lot of flake from his friends. He said, really, Ben? And, you know, he would look at them and he said, yeah. And if you don't like it, you can talk to my mother. You know, and they respected me, so it was not a problem. But I think that boys really do need to have sensitivity classes.
The community that I live up here in is predominantly a Mennonite community, and I'm not from that culture or that community.
Yeah, that's not going to go over too well.
Well, however, in one of the very early conversations that I had up here, they told me that their young boys actually go through classes to learn how to be good husbands. And I thought, wouldn't that be an interesting way to educate, and not just men? I think that boys and girls need to be educated on how to be their best selves in a relationship, so that the girls don't lose themselves. And I recently had a conversation with a good friend who has been in multiple failed relationships, and it's because she gets into this place of wanting so desperately to be loved by these men that she becomes needy, and they pull back and they don't want anything to do with that kind of relationship. So not only teaching men how to be great husbands, but also teaching girls how to be strong and confident in those relationships, and not in a domineering way, but in an
equality way. I
Yeah.
was telling somebody last night, I said I really would like to start teaching couples of how to be married.
Yes.
Because they really don't know.
Yeah.
And their behavior is a reflection of themselves spiritually as well as day to day. And I said I would really love to start running a class on that. So we need to get together after we talk.
Yeah.
Because I think that our society as a whole has come to a place where discussion needs to be out there, talking about how both can succeed without taking away from the other.
Mm-hmm.
And in the present society as such, we have not reached it yet.
No.
And it should not be where one has to give up their dream so that the other can obtain theirs.
That's
and
right.
I think that both male and female, has been doing that for ever since the Industrial Revolution came along. That somebody had to suffer for the other to succeed at the other's expense. Mm-hmm. And goodness knows, I'm sure you know the stats for marriages that are broken beyond repair because of that.
Yep.
So things like that really need to be addressed or taught so that when you go into a marriage, you have a 50-50 chance actually of making it past the first 3 years. Mm-hmm. My son's been married for 15 years. All of his friends are divorced. Mm-hmm. They didn't make it past the first 3 years. And I think that after the first year, the honeymoon is over, but I think what is worse is that neither person within that relationship knows how to behave. As I told him, anybody can have sex. It's what happens when you don't, or after you've done that.
Well, it's about a relationship.
It's been a relationship.
A physical.
Yes. And a lot of kids haven't gotten that. Even with having premarital sex, mm-hmm. They haven't gotten past the point where marriage is so much more.
That's right.
And one needs to go through so much more. So, Brenda, please tell everybody where they can find you on the World Wide Web, where they can find the books you help write, and anything else. This is your brag time.
Oh, okay. So I have 2 websites. The first one, if you want to get one of the books, they're both on my website at BrendaWaltonInspires.com. People can also, if they're interested in learning more about each of the 6 steps in the Worthy program, I've done a video series, one on each of the steps, and they can request free access to that, and out of that they also get invited to a complimentary discovery call with me, so they can learn more about the Worthy program and whether they want to explore it further. So that website with the 6 videos and the complimentary discovery call with me is worthywomen.com.
Terrific. And do you have any final words of wisdom to pass along?
Well, my final words of wisdom are always that I believe we were all born worthy, and that something has taken us off track. Temporarily, we've got distracted by something that has taken us away from that. And this, I would love for this to be a wake-up call for somebody to realize that they had that worthiness within them all along, and now's the time to reconnect with it.
Terrific. Thank you all very much for joining us today on Cool Your Heels with Lillian Caldwell and her special guest, Brenda Walton. And you can listen to this interview on June 26th at ANFN247.com, PassionateWorldRadioNetwork.com, Twitter.com/PassTheGiants, Facebook.com/PWR Network LLC, iTunes, YouTube. And before you go away and stray, Thomas Fuller had this to say: better lose a jest than a friend. Thank you all very much for listening. And remember, please keep listening. Thank you.